Welcome to another episode of Thoughts of a No, God, I thought about it too, and I still messed it up. Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard, and today we are going to continue our episodes learning about anarchy, and then we're gonna move over to philosophy. Hopefully, if we have some time. Yeah, I'm wearing a little get up here because I'm gonna finally see Wakanda Forever, and I know that movie's gonna have some problems. Don't get me wrong, but got to support a little bit, you know. Only movie we really have out there. Well, Woman King, I went to see that too. That was good. But I want more of these movies, even if they're problematic. It's a starting point, you know. It's a starting point. And but anyways, without further ado, let's jump right into here. So if you recall, last time we finished up chapter 6, talking about a revolution. That is many revolutions. How we're gonna have to attack this problem from many different directions. And so this chapter is talking about neighboring societies. And I think I'm very excited about this one as well. Like every chapter is a great one. Um, but this one's seems to be tackling the problem where people are going to be talking about how, oh, in a world, everybody's going to be this, so how are you going to protect yourself, or how are you going to, line up to, more authoritarian powers, or this, that, and the other. So I'm very curious to see what Peter Gelderloo has to say. Um, let's jump into it. So, neighboring societies. Because anarchism opposes domination and enforced conformity, an anarchist revolution would not create a completely anarchist world. Anarchist societies would need to find peaceful ways of coexisting with neighboring societies, defending themselves from authoritarian neighbors and supporting liberation in societies with oppressive internal dynamics. Very much so, right? This is a great point here. Like people like to think that people we're gonna try to force this on people, but that defeats the whole purpose, right? The whole purpose is to show that there is a better alternative and allow people to come over to that realm of thinking themselves, right? That does the so-called free market of ideas, right? This is the ultimate free market because now you can actually see for yourself, do you want to live under this capitalist regime or this other regime, or do you want to live with these anarchists, right? So actually when we actually have to get to build out these alternatives, then people can really see for themselves. Right now, people can't even make the choice, right? You have this theoretical stuff that says, oh, anarchy can't work because blah, 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 blah. But in reality, you just have like the CIA or whatever, just, destroying any chance for it to even pop up, right? So this is why it's so important to make it happen and then protect it, right? So it's always an option. Let's continue. It says, did an anarchist society defend itself from an authoritarian neighbor? Some people worried that an anarchist revolution would be a poor venture because an anti-authoritarian society will quickly be conquered, goodness, by an authoritarian neighbor. Of course, an anarchist revolution is not a strictly national affair, limiting itself to the borders of the government it is overthrowing. Good point. The idea is not to create a small pocket of freedom where we can hide or retire, but to abolish. Excuse me. But to abolish systems of slavery and domination on a worldwide scale. Yes. Because some areas might liberate themselves before others, the question remains whether an anarchist society will be safe from an authoritarian neighbor. Actually, the answer is no. Ooh. States and capitalism are imperialist by nature, and they will always try to conquer neighbors and universalize their rule. Yeah. The elite class of hierarchical societies are already at war with their own lower classes, and they extend this logic to their relations with the rest of the world, which becomes nothing but a pool of resources for them to exploit so as to win more advantages in their unending war. Yep, sounds like what we got today, basically, right? Anarchist societies, meanwhile, encourage revolution in authoritarian societies both through intentional solidarity with rebels in those societies and by providing a subversive example of freedom. Exactly. Showing the subjects of the state that they do not need to live in fear and submission. So, in fact, neither of these societies will be safe from the other, but an anarchist society will by no means be defenseless, right? That's another great point. You're always going to have some like combating when you have these ideas that are mutually exclusive. But what's really funny though, when people say this, is that our current society isn't really safe, right? The current authoritarian societies, or so-called democratic ones, aren't safe, right? Because we have the same battles within the very same system and without from other foreign powers and things like that. So even to this day, where we have this kind of illusion of safety, there's it's really not, right? Um, so it's very interesting too that he brought that up. The anarchist society of southern Ukraine at the end of the First World War was a major threat to the German and Austrian empires, the White Army, the short-lived nationalist Ukrainian state, and the Soviet Union. The voluntary militias of the Makhnovists inspired major desertions. I think that's how you say that word. From the ranks of the authoritarian Red Army, forced out the Austro-Germans and the nationalists who tried to lay claim to their lands, and aided the defeat of the White Army. This is especially remarkable considering that they were armed almost entirely with weapons and ammunition seized from the enemy. Coordinating forces of up to tens of thousands, the anarchists regularly fought on multiple fronts and shifted between frontal and guerrilla warfare with the fluidity conventional armies are incapable of. Despite always being vastly outnumbered, they defended their land for several years. At two decisive battles, Pera- Paragonovka and the Perekop Isthmus, the Makhnovist militia smashed the larger White Army, which was supplied by Western governments. Ain't that something? Extraordinary mobility and a bag of clever tricks constituted Makhno's chief tactical devices. Traveling on horseback and in light peasant carts, or tachonki, on which machine guns were mounted, his men and women moved swiftly back and forth across the open steppe between the Dnieper and the Sea of Azov, swelling into a small army as they went, and inspiring terror in the hearts of their adversaries. Hitherto independent guerrilla bands accepted Makhno's command and rallied behind his black banner. Villagers willingly provided food and fresh horses, enabling the Makhno, to Makhnovsky to travel 40 or 50 miles a day with little difficulty. They would turn up quite suddenly where least expected, attack the gentry and military garrisons, then vanish as quickly as they had come. Sounds like an epic, movie or something. When cornered, Makhnovsky would bury their weapons, um, make their way singly back to their villages, and take up work in the fields, awaiting the next signal to unearth a new cache of arms and spring up again in an unexpected quarter. Makhno's insurgents, in the words of the Victor Serge, revealed a truly epic capacity for organization and combat. Amazing. Very, 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 very amazing. Now, it is scary because today, the U.S. military specifically is so overpowered, right, in so many different ways that I'm not sure if something similar will work. But at the same time, right, at the same time, it is good to recognize that the U.S. military is not a monolith, right? There are many people within the military who disagree with the military or who disagree with this, that, and the other, and would probably, band together to form militias against the military, anyways. Um, Especially if you know we can build out real ideas of freedom and all this other stuff, and they can get with that. So, not as clear cut. After the supposed allies, the Bolsheviks endeavored to impose bureaucratic control over southern Ukraine while the Makhnovists were fighting at the front. They successfully waged guerrilla warfare against the massive Red Army for 2 years, aided by popular support. The ultimate defeat of the Ukrainian anarchists demonstrates the need for greater international solidarity. Hmm. If other uprisings against the Bolsheviks had been better coordinated, they might not have been able to concentrate so much of their might on smashing anarchists in Ukraine. Likewise, if libertarian socialists in other countries had spread news of the Bolshevik repression rather than all relying behind Lenin, an anti authoritarian rebellion in one corner of the world might even be able to defend itself from the government it is overthrowing in several neighboring governments, but not from all the governments of the entire world. Good point. Global repression must be met with global resistance. Let's say that again. Global repression must be met with global resistance. Solidarity, y'all. Fortunately, as capital globalizes, popular networks do as well. Our ability to form worldwide movements and act quickly in solidarity with the struggle on the other side of the planet is greater than ever before. Exactly. In parts of the pre-colonial Africa, anarchic societies were able to exist side by side with predatory states for centuries because the terrain and available technology favored defensive warfare with bows and arrows, the democratic weapon of warfare since anyone can have one. The Seminole tribe of Florida provide an inspiring example of a stateless anarchistic society persisting despite the best efforts of an extremely powerful, technologically advanced neighboring state with a population thousands of times larger. The Seminole, whose name originally means runaways, formed out of several indigenous nations, principally the Western Creek, fleeing genocide through the southeastern part of what white people had decided it was the United States. The Somali also included a significant number of escaped African slaves and even a few white Europeans who had run away from the oppressive society of the United States. Amazing. The inclusivity of the Seminole demonstrates how indigenous Americans viewed tribe and nation as matters of voluntary association and acceptance within a community, rather than restrictive ethnic hereditary categories that are assumed to be in Western civilization. The Seminole call themselves the unconquered people. Amazing. Because they never signed a peace treaty with the colonizers. They survived a series of wars waged against them by the United States and managed to kill 1,500 U.S. soldiers and an unknown number of militiamen. During the Second Seminole War from 1835 to 1842, the 1,000 Seminole warriors in the Everglades employed guerrilla tactics to devastating effect, even though they faced 9,000 professional, well-equipped soldiers. The war cost the U.S. government $20 million, a huge sum at the time. But by the end of the war, the U.S. government had managed to force most of the Somali into exile in Oklahoma, but gave up on conquering the remaining group, who never surrendered and continued to live free of government control for decades. Very interesting there. The Mapuche are large, Mapuche or Mapuche, are a large indigenous group living on land now occupied by the states of Chile. Yeah, it is Chile, right? Yeah, I think so. Chile? I don't know. And Argentina. Traditionally, they made decisions with consensus and a minimum of hierarchy. Lacking any kind of state apparatus did not prevent them from defending themselves. Before the European invasion, they successfully defended themselves from their hierarchical neighbors, the Inca, who were, by European standards, far more advanced. During the Spanish conquest, the Inca fell quickly, but the Mapuche lands became known as the Spanish Cemetery after the Mapuche defeated the conquistadors in a series of wars spanning 100 years. Spain signed the Treaty of Quilin, admitting its failure to conquer the Mapuche and recognizing them as a sovereign nation. Mapuche sovereignty was further recognized in 28 subsequent treaties. Amazing. Wowzers. There's a lot of great stuff here. So it shows you that like this stuff is possible, and it has happened before, and it can happen again, right? And the biggest failures for these were not then in and of themselves, but the lack of solidarity, right? The lack of support from other groups and things like that. And a huge reason for that could be, um, kind of broken down to the fact that just the world was less globalized, the world was less connected before. So if somebody was rebelling in one place, it was incredibly hard for people in another place to know what was happening, right? If it was across the world. So a big, kind of benefit of the internet and how communications works today is that if somebody is rebelling against, these powers, then other folks can, become aware of that and join the movement. So we have no reason to not engage in this solidarity. We have more ability to actually support these people and make sure these movements are more successful. In their wars against the Spanish, Mapuche groups unified under elected war leaders, taki or axe carriers. Unlike troops in the military, the groups maintained their autonomy and fought freely rather than under coercion. This lack of hierarchy and coercion oh, excuse me, goodness, proved to be a military advantage for the Mapuche. Throughout the Americas, hierarchical indigenous groups like the Inca and Aztecs were defeated quickly by the invaders, as they often surrendered after the loss of a leader or capital. They were also weakened by revenge attacks from the enemies they had made by conquering neighboring groups before the Europeans arrived. The anarchistic indigenous groups were often the ones most capable of waging guerrilla warfare against their occupiers. Yep, great point there. I don't know if you hear my dog in the back, or not even my dog, my sister's, because they got a new dog and they've been fighting a little bit. Not really fighting, but like there's this dog that was found on the street and they didn't know what to do with him, so they picked him up. But my sister's dog does not like the company, I guess. I don't know. So she's been very aggy. So I don't know what to do, what they're gonna do, because I'm like, you can't really keep them like that. So I don't know. You might hear them in the back whining, but they're basically on timeout. Um, but Yeah, you might not even be able to hear it. It doesn't look like the mic is picking them up, but just in case you do, so you know what's going on. From 1860 to 65, the Mapuche was invaded and pacified by the Chilean and Argentine states, a genocide that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The invaders began a process of suppressing the Mapuche language and Christianizing the conquered people. But Mapuche resistance continues, and thanks to this, a number of Mapuche communities still enjoy a relative degree of autonomy. The resistance remains a threat to the security of the Chilean state. As of this writing, several Mapuche are imprisoned under Pinochet era anti-terrorism laws for attacks against forestry plantations and copper mines that were destroying the land. Think about that. These people are arrested for protecting the land. Fierce indigenous resistance was not the only major barrier to colonialism. As resources were forcibly transferred from the Americas to Europe, a phenomenon arose from the long and proud tradition of banditry to strike fear into the hearts of merchants trafficking gold and slaves. Writers from Daniel Defoe to Peter Lambin Wilson have portrayed piracy as a struggle against Christendom, capitalism, and its predecessor, mercantilism, and government. Pirate havens were a constant threat to established order, disruptors of globalized plunder under colonialism, instigators of slave rebellions, refuges. I don't know why I'm not saying words today. Where lower class runaways could retreat and join in the war against their former masters. The pirate republic of Saleh, near what is now the capital of Morocco, pioneered forms of representative democracy a century before the French Revolution. In the Caribbean, many of the runaways joined the remnants of indigenous societies and adopted their egalitarian structures. This pirate social class also contained many proto anarchist social revolutionaries, such as levelers, diggers, and ranters, banished to English penal colonies in the New World. Many pirate captains were elected and immediately recallable. It's a lot of great information right here, man. I love this. Again, it shows you like there's such a rich history of rebellion, of contact, of communication, stuff like that, of people just fighting for freedom, right, and not accepting the status quo of being conquered and things like that. So it's amazing. The authorities were often shocked by their libertarian tendencies. The Dutch governor of Mauritius met a pirate crew and commented, "Every man had as much as the captain, and each man carried his own weapons in his blanket." This was profoundly threatening to the order of European society, where firearms were restricted to the upper classes, and provided a stark contrast to merchant ships, where anything that could be used as a weapon was kept under lock and key, and to the navy, where the primary purpose of the Marines stationed on naval vessels was to keep the sailors in their place. And what's funny too, because I've recently been rewatching One Piece, and like that anime is like so apropos, right? It shows you like, yes, there were a lot of kind of terrible pirates and stuff like that, and people just that are wild, but there are some good pirates. There's some like camaraderie and some honor and all this other stuff, and you can see like the kind of ACAT moments, right? Where a lot of the Marines were just as bad as the pirates, if not worse, right? Um, and a lot of the Marines were just playing out like stupid in some ways because like you have all these moments where they would just be like, "Oh yeah, let's go get the Straw Hat Pirates," even though the Straw Hats literally did nothing, actually bad. They were, helping, to stop a lot of these abuses of power and stuff like that. And yes, I know, obviously, it's because it's a cartoon and they're the good guys and everything like that, but the fact of the matter is it wasn't just the Straw Hats. Oftentimes you saw many different pirates kind of come together to fight off these really abusive systems and everything like that. And again, it is an anime, but it shows you that you know it helps to visualize like other sides of this story, right? And of course there's many other kind of movies and stuff out there that shows this kind of nuance with piracy and stuff like that. But it's just very interesting that in our own, even in the mainstream literature, right, in the mainstream media, you still see this nuance. You still see this idea that fighting against these big powers and having and many of these pirate groups and things like that, or just other types of rebellious kind of outlaws and things like that, were just trying to live their lives and were oftentimes more honorable and more egalitarian than the so-called civilized, folks. So it's just very interesting to me. I'm sorry, my mouth is like so dry this morning. Okay, let's finish this up. Pirate societies cultivated greater gender equality as well. Yep. And a number of pirate captains were women. Many pirates thought of themselves as Robin Hoods. Yeah. And a few considered themselves subjects of and few considered themselves subjects of any state, while numerous other pirates engaged in mercantilism, selling their stolen goods to the highest bidders, or even participated in the slave trade. Another current in piracy constituted an early force for abolitionism, aiding slave rebellions and involving many ex-slaves. Authorities in North American colonies like Virginia were concerned about connections between piracy and slave insurrections. Fear of slaves running away to join the pirates and rob their former masters, and of racially mixed uprisings encouraged the development of laws in the colonies to punish racial mixing. Yeah, that's such a huge part, like Bacon's Rebellion of American history, where the powers that be saw the fact that these people would, like, the lower classes would rebel against them, so they purposely made it so that black folks and white folks and all these other folks would see each other as enemies. And you still see a lot of that to this day, right? With people, it's not as much with kind of black white dichotomy, but you still kind of see it with the whole Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter crap. It's the same idea. It's trying to separate the masses so that people don't band together against the true enemies, which is these freaking wealthy people who have all the power and are getting everybody else to fight against each other. If you can convince all the marginalized groups or the poor people and stuff like that they're enemies of each other, right? Then you have way less power for those of us on the bottom to rise up. So yeah, this is still a strategy that works to this day, right? A lot of it you see today actually with the LGBT community, right? And people attacking trans community, even though the trans people are a small sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a margin of a marginal group, and yet they're completely over indexed on and often seen as the big bad enemies, when really a lot of people could benefit from listening to these people and being in solidarity with trans people, because there are people who are just trying to live their own lives, right? And trying to live that freedom. And if we can foster that freedom in other people to express themselves more and stuff like that, and not follow the status quo of whoever's in power, whoever's telling you to just live how they want you to live, then more of us can foster that spirit of freedom. But it's just so sad that this still works to this day. Anyways, these were some of the first juridical. That was jurisdictional. Is that a word? Juridical attempts to institutionalize segregation and generalize racism. Oh goodness, racism among the white lower class. Throughout the Caribbean and other parts of the world, liberated pirate enclaves thrived for years, though they are shrouded in mystery. The fact that these pirate societies were a widespread and long-lasting problem for the imperial powers, and that many of them were shockingly libertarian, is documented, but other information is lacking, given that they existed at war with the writers of history. It is telling that the best described pirate utopia, Libertalia, or alternately Libertatia, is heavily disputed. Many parts of its history are generally recognized to be fictitious, but some sources allege that Libertatia is in its entirety never existed, while others maintain that its legendary founder, Captain James Misson, was just a literary invention, but the pirate settlement itself did exist. Interesting, huh? The expanding navies of Great Britain and the United States finally crushed piracy in the 19th century, but in the 17th and 18th centuries, pirates constituted a powerful stateless society that waged war against imperialism and government and enabled thousands of people to liberate themselves at a time when the oppressiveness of Western civilization surpassed all the previous barbarities in world history. And I think you're going to see more of that come today, right? As you see this kind of play out again across digital environments, across capitalistic places where these wealthy folks are trying to control more and more of the populace. I think you're going to see piracy crop up again, right? Digital piracy, which you of course see in terms of media, but also I think you're going to see that in terms of, like, maybe things like the Fediverse or Mastodon servers, where people are going to, basically pirate out digital software, which again you kind of see already, but I think it's going to become more and more popular and more, a threat to the hegemony of, these digital monopolies and things like that. And of course, it's going to bleed into real life, where people can create the new kind of power towns and stuff like that. So I'm very much looking forward to it, and I'm very curious to see how it's going to play out. But yeah, that's this section. And it looks like we still have time, so I'm gonna take a little break to try to drink more water and then get back on my next stream. I'm talking about some philosophy, getting back to Hegel. So as always, thanks for listening, thanks for watching. Let me know what you learned in this section, what your thoughts are, what you agree with, disagree with. Let's have a conversation. Thank you as always, and have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.